Hello, readers by eyes and ears. This is Mari Chen, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, we will be continuing the reading of Thousand Autumns Volume 2, also known as Tianqiu by Meng Xi Shi. We will be reading chapters 41 through 43. Enjoy! Chapter 41, Rescue. When she noticed Shen Qiao keeping silent, Bai Zhong turned to look at him. Shen Lang, you couldn't tell either? Shen Qiao shook his head but didn't answer. After a moment, Zhu Yankehui's voice drifted from afar, echoing across the distance, resounding loudly enough to shake the canyon. The eardrums of those assembled jolted as well. It's been a long time since I dueled someone to the fullest, he said. Contending with Sect Leader Yan today has been a true joy. I'm deeply grateful for Sect Leader Yan's wonderful advice. If you huddle in the corner for too long, you'll lose sight of the wider world, said Yan Wushi. Just like a frog in a well or a leopard in a cage. You're so accustomed to playing Overlord in Southern Chun, Academy Master Ru Yan, and when you finally meet an equal opponent, you were taken by surprise. My venerable self understands this very well. Once you receive guidance a few more times, the surprise will wear off. As always, whenever Yan Wushi opened his mouth, sarcastic comments streamed out. Hearing them was enough to make any listener grit their teeth. But with the way he stood upon the cliff face, hands clasped behind his back and robes dancing, the assembled spectators simply had to look up at him as well. His achievements in martial arts, his incredible strength, many understood that they'd never reach such heights. It was human nature to admire those of great strength. And if anyone claimed they felt no trace of admiration for the egotistical Huanyue sect leader, who had the power to warrant such an ego, they'd be lying. Zhu Yankehui, however, took this all in stride. He laughed. All right, then someday, when the chance arises, I'll personally seek out your guidance. There was nothing odd about Zhu Yankehui's voice, and Yan Wushi seemed the same as always, too. The spectators grew confused. They couldn't detect any sign of injuries through the combatants' words. The two of them had spent more than half a day's worth of energy, yet neither of them was injured, and neither of them had won? They puzzled over it. This once-in-a-lifetime duel between two martial experts was seriously ending in a draw? Some of them had also been at Banbu Peak, where they'd witnessed Kunye throwing Shen Qiao off the cliff. Even though the Gokturk's victory left them unhappy and made them mourn the defeat of one of their own, an intense battle warranted such an intense conclusion. Today's duel between such martial greats as Zhu Yankehui and Yan Wushi should have been on an even higher level, and yet it ended like this. They couldn't help but find it disappointing. But neither Yan Wushi nor Zhu Yankehui needed to explain their actions to others. After a brief exchange of words, they floated down from the cliff. One landed by the creek, the other on a rocky beach not too far from Shen Qiao and Bai Zhong. Zhu Yankehui courteously cupped his hands at Yan Wushi. As Sect Leader Yan has come from afar, I ought to do my part as host. How many days does Sect Leader Yan intend to stay in Jiankang? Let me know, and I can have Linchuan Academy send you an invitation to be our guest. No need, Yan Wushi said indifferently. I can't stomach the water of your Linchuan Academy. I fear I'll come away with a belly full of your doctrines on virtues and morality. You should save those for fooling brainless men and witless women. Zhu Yankehui smiled and didn't force the issue. Then I shall take my leave now. With a flick of his sleeves, he turned and departed. His strides appeared ordinary, but he moved great distances in the blink of an eye. It was a truly profound technique, and even swift people could only stare tongue-tied at the dust he left behind. With a long sigh, I wipe my tears at the lives of men weighed down by troubles and despair. Though self-discipline and moral purity I do adore, my morning advice begets naught but evening scorn. First they attacked the cymbidium I wear, then castigated my love for plucking orchids so fair. For the ideals I pursue within my heart, I'd not regret 1,000 deaths to die. The sound of singing drifted in from afar. Zhu Yankehui was reciting Li Sao. The song flowed in his southern accent, resounding through the valley, and the sorrow of the original transformed into valor, rousing the spirits of every listener. It seemed like Ru Yankehui's abilities hadn't suffered from his match with Yan Wushi at all, many thought. Not long ago, Do Yan Shan had issued a challenge to Yan Wushi in front of everyone, but after watching their match, he turned and left without a word. A couple of troublemakers were displeased at how the Liu He Guild dominated everything, and one of them shouted after him, "Didn't Guild Leader Do want to challenge Sect Leader Yan to a duel? Why are you leaving so soon?" Do Yan Shan stopped in his tracks and turned back, shooting the man a glare that sent shivers through his heart. "The dragon who crosses rivers, Li Yue. Perhaps I am not a match for Sect Leader Yan, but I'm more than enough to handle you. Do you believe me?" said Do Yan Shan, a hint of a smile on his face. Li Yue hadn't thought Do Yan Shan would call him out by name. He didn't dare say anything more and quickly scuttled away with his tail tucked between his legs. Yan Wushi gazed at Ru Yankehui's silhouette as it glided off into the distance. Then he flew straight to the treetops of the bamboo forest. Using the long, slim branches to spring forward, he finally landed on a sheer cliff wall where they'd fought and started to climb, his movements as graceful as a falcon's. A couple of breaths later, he was already out of sight. With the main characters gone, there was no point in lingering. One by one, the spectators all left, each still thinking that it was a pity, although it was difficult to say whether the pity was the draw or the fact that they were unlikely to witness a duel of such caliber again. Before the battle, most people had believed that no matter how strong Yan Wushi was, Ru Yankehui was still a notch above him. After all, while Yan Wushi was one of the top 10, Ru Yankehui ranked in the top 3. But after today, they'd no longer dare to say so. Yan Wushi's reputation would surely soar to new heights, and the battle would soon become a hot topic. If all went as expected, it would be the Jianghu's most spectacular battle in years. At some point, Bai Zhong, who'd been standing beside Shen Qiao, had vanished without a trace. She came and went like a shadow, even left without a goodbye. Shen Qiao didn't chase after her, nor did he retrace his steps down the road he'd taken. Instead, he squinted for a long while as if scrutinizing something, and then left along another small path. By now, the sky had darkened completely. The mountain winds grew colder after nightfall. Although it was April, summer hadn't yet taken hold. Through cracks in the canyon walls, the gales howled and wailed like the weeping of ghosts. The summit of this mountain was somewhat similar to Banbu Peak, where Shen Qiao and Kunye's match had taken place. It was not as tall, but there was little foothold at the peak, and the ground there was treacherously narrow. Only a scant few trees grew there. Their branches rustled in the night wind, too scraggly and thin for anyone to lean on, let alone to use as protection from the night winds. But when one crossed over the cliff top and went a little down the other side, they'd find a sunken hole that formed a cave, large enough to accommodate 3 or 4 people. With a rocky wall against one's back and a stone ledge hanging overhead, it was a natural shelter from the wind, and inside this cave sat the cross-legged silhouette of a man. When Li Yue entered, the man didn't move at all, as if he were dead. "Sect Leader Yan?" he asked, questioning. If someone else heard him, the name would surely have given them a fright. Yan Wushi and Ru Yankehui had clearly left long before, so why would Sect Leader Yan reappear in this mountain cave? Li Yue called his name several more times, but there was no reaction from Yan Wushi. A nerve grew, and as he crept closer, step by step, he groped inside his lapels for a touch, then lit it. He shone the firelight at where Yan Wushi was sitting. The man almost looked like a high monk who'd passed away in self-mummification, as immovable as bedrock. Even the flickering torchlight couldn't make him open his eyes. Joy suffused Li Yue's heart. He was so excited, even his hands began to tremble imperceptibly. He was only a second-rate martial artist, but he'd come from a long line of constables, and his judgment was keen. From a young age, he'd been influenced by his father and grandfather and had developed a habit of observing the subtlest details. Everyone believed Ru Yankehui and Yan Wushu's strength was equal, thought their final draw was a pity. However, Li Yue didn't see things that way. It was a battle that had lasted for the day into the night, and both sides had given, if not their all, then at least 8 or 9/10 of it. There was no doubting it. Where they'd fought most fiercely, the mountain stones had been shattered into powder, boulders half the size of men splintered into gravel in mere seconds. The river waters temporarily reversed, and the surrounding trees snapped clean in two. In the face of such enormous might, the spectators hadn't even dared to block with their internal chi. With just how much destructive power there'd been, could both combatants have really walked away without a scratch? Even a peerless expert like Qi Fengge eventually met their death. There was always some chance of injury, as long as they weren't true immortals entirely disconnected from the world. Though Ru Yankehui and Yan Wushu both acted as if nothing had happened, Li Yue's intuition told him that the conclusion wasn't so simple. His martial arts would never catch up to those two, but when the others had left, he'd stayed to wander the surroundings and even scaled the cliff for a closer look. During the duel, the combatants had stopped for a moment on the peak, and no one knew what had happened during that time. For half a day, Li Yue did nothing but search, and in the end, he found nothing. He was just about to leave, thinking that he was once again overthinking things, when he came upon the cave, and inside was Yan Wushu. It was truly a great surprise from the heavens. Li Yue tried to calm himself down, but he couldn't suppress the trembling in his hands, which had his torch quaking. Its firelight wavered unsteadily inside the cave, casting an inexplicable, treacherous pall over the place. He was certain that Yan Wushu must have been injured and was here to recuperate. Furthermore, for Yan Wushu to remain unaware even as Li Yue approached, it might be no light wound. If he could kill Yan Wushu, display his corpse to everyone to see, then in the space of a night his name would resound throughout the entire land. And then everyone in the land would know that the one who'd killed the demon lord wasn't the Linchuan Academy master Ru Yankehui, but the dragon who crosses rivers, Li Yue himself. In his extreme elation, he failed to give a thought to the troubles that would follow. For example, if he truly killed Yan Wushu, how would he deal with Huan Yue's sect? Who would certainly come after his head? And how would he make the world believe that a second-rate fellow like him had managed to kill the Yan Wushu when even Ru Yankehui couldn't? But Li Yue didn't consider any of this. The temptation of success and fame had flooded his mind, and involuntarily, he drew his sword at his waist. The sword's point advanced inch by inch. The demon lord, so proud and vigorous earlier that very day, was now right in front of him, dead to the world and completely at his mercy. In the throes of his excitement, there was a twisted cast to his expression. Then suddenly, his face froze. Li Yue stared, wide-eyed, at the bamboo cane that had appeared without warning and was blocking his sword point. Slowly and stiffly, he raised his head, gazing at the cane's owner, who had soundlessly appeared. To take advantage of this misfortune of others is not the act of an upright man. If you do this, your martial arts will never advance an inch in your entire life, said Shen Qiao calmly. Leave. What do you know? Snarled Li Yue. I was 15 when I entered the Jianghu. People called me talented too, back in my youth. But after I turned 25, my martial arts progress stopped completely. If I take Yan Wushu's head, my name will surely shake the Jianghu. Shen Qiao shook his head. If you kill him, will your martial arts advance? This is only the envy the weak feel toward the strong. When the chance for power over them is dangled before you, you are overwhelmed with excitement. Don't give your inner demons power over you, or your martial arts will never improve again for the rest of your life. By now, Li Yue was thoroughly enraged. You blind man! Why are you getting involved? Shen Qiao, Don't think that no one recognizes you. Everyone in the Jianghu knows about your collusion with Yan Wushi. Even Xuandu Mountain has expelled you from its doors. You've lost all face for Qi Fengge, the disciple of the world's #1 martial artist. You're only a sycophant who sold your body to the demon lord in return for his favor. Have you found enjoyment in being a slave? Afraid that if I kill Yan Wushi, no one will protect you anymore? If you're a man, then show some spine. Don't just lean on other people. The words didn't stoke Shen Qiao's anger. Ever since his identity had been exposed at the Su residence during the fight against Duen Wenyang, a strange light had surfaced in many of the looks people gave him. Though they might not say so out loud, deep down, their thoughts were much like Li Yue's. Shen Qiao had heard far worse. Still, sharp words were only words. As long as they were paid no mind, they couldn't hurt you in the slightest. Seeing Shen Qiao stay silent, Li Yue thought the insults he'd slung had worked. He gave a sneering laugh. Taoist Master Shen, if you get out of my way, then after I kill Yan Wushi, we could divide up whatever goods he has on him. As he spoke, he thrust out with his sword. The sword's glare flashed as it shot out at blistering speed. It was a move Li Yue was quite proud of, strong enough to pierce through wood. The attack went straight for Yan Wushi's upper back. Clang! An echoing ring sounded. The blade point did not stab into Yan Wushi. Instead, the entire sword was sent flying. It arced through the air before clattering right to the ground. All Li Yue felt was a sharp pain to his wrist, and he cried out despite himself. His action was swift too. At the sight of the bamboo cane sweeping toward his waist, he dropped into a crouch while tipping his torso backward, dodging beneath the cane's swipe. Then he sprang upward, making a grab for the cane while sending a kick at Shen Qiao's groin. But Shen Qiao had already drifted out of reach, then immediately reappeared behind him with unbelievable speed. Li Yue didn't even have time to react before a palm to his back slapped him sideways into the stone wall and knocked him unconscious. Underestimating Shen Qiao wasn't to blame for Li Yue's defeat, for even if he hadn't, he was destined to lose today. News of Shen Qiao and Duen Wenyang's duel at the Su residence had never circulated, and the people who'd lost to him, like Bai Zhong and Xiao Si, couldn't possibly run around announcing their losses. So many impressions of him had remained frozen at the match on Banbu Peak. And then afterward had come the myriad of rumors and hearsay. As a result, opinions of Shen Qiao had plummeted. The more someone had looked up to him before, the more they'd look down on him after. Overnight, Shen Qiao's name became linked to Yan Wushi's, and on top of that, was now synonymous with homeless cur. Shen Qiao didn't bother with Li Yue any further, just walked on toward Yan Wushi. When he touched him, a burst of frigid cold pierced through the skin of his palm and into his flesh, almost invasive as it spread through his limbs and body. The chill was so intense he immediately let go. But even so, it clung to his hand for a long while before gradually fading away. Yan Wushi's body wasn't only as solid and hard as ice, it seemed practically devoid of life. It was as if his 5 senses were completely sealed, as if that was why he'd remained entirely unaware of Shen Qiao and Li Yue's conversation, as well as their scuffle. Shen Qiao thought for a moment, then pulled Yan Wushi's hand from his sleeve to examine his pulse, all while enduring that bone-piercing cold. The pulse still throbbed, and breath still fanned beneath his nose, but his meridians seemed to be in disorder, as if several streams of qi were all weaving, jostling, and colliding against each other, discordant. In other words, Yan Wushi was showing signs of qi deviation. The more advanced someone's martial arts, the longer the road they traveled on their way to the top, and then all the more inevitable that they'd find all kinds of higher pursuits along the way. This meant they became less willing to follow convention, and so the chance of them entering qi deviation was likewise increased. Peerlessly talented grandmasters like Qi Fengge, Cui Yuang, and Hulugu could have lived long lives and died natural deaths if they'd chosen a peaceful existence. Any of them could have easily managed another 10 years, but they refused to pause in their pursuit of martial studies, for to them, that would be a punishment worse than death. And after reaching each new level, attempting the next step was tantamount to scaling the sky. A single moment of carelessness would have easily pushed them into a chi deviation and endangered their lives. In truth, Shen Qiao had discovered Yan Wushi's current dilemma a long time ago. The difference between demonic cores and Taoist ones lay in their contrasting paths. Just like heaven and earth, white and black, they could never intersect. Even Cui Wang, the former top martial artist of the demonic sects, never attempted to join the two cores. Nobody had. Not in thousands of years. But Yan Wushi's very nature demanded that, in his endless pursuit of martial arts, he try the things all others thought impossible. Hence, during his 10 years of seclusion, he'd not only finished practicing all the martial arts recorded inside the Juyang strategy scrolls, he'd also used the Juyang strategy's true qi to forge a new set of foundations for himself, a Taoist core. No matter how powerful a person was, their body could only house one set of foundations. But Yan Wushi aspired to have both a demonic and Taoist core coexist inside of him. To fashion a Taoist core while retaining his demonic one. Of course, this was impossible. How could someone house both a demonic and Taoist core inside their body at the same time? Which was why, for 10 years, Yan Wushi did not succeed. Even though his abilities grew by leaps and bounds, and although he'd already become a martial artist to rival the likes of Qi Fengge, he still couldn't overcome that hurdle. Instead, his efforts left a lurking peril inside him. Normally, it wasn't obvious, but during his fight with Ru Yankehui today, both sides had been forged to go all out, and so this inner peril had been dragged to the surface. Shen Qiao frowned deeply. He tried to send his true qi into Yan Wushi's body, but it seemed to reject him. Not only that, but it lashed back at him with a surge of icy qi which rampaged through Shen Qiao's body. In an instant, it spread to all his meridians. Shen Qiao jolted and was forced to let go of Yan Wushi's hand to focus on himself. He sat down to regulate his breathing, trying to dissolve the frigid burst of qi. The moon was cold and bleak, the mountains silent and empty. Owls hooted again and again, sending a shock of desolation right through to his bones. The balmy coolness of early summer was nowhere to be found. Li Yue's torch had already burnt out. Shen Qiao stood and walked toward the fallen man, hoping to find another few torches on his body that he could light and warm himself with. Shen Long, this one was sitting outside for so long and you didn't even invite her in. You don't know how to take care of a lady at all. The sound of complaining reached his ears and a face appeared outside the cave, looking both annoyed and pleased. Shen Qiao wasn't surprised, nor did he answer. Smiling brightly, Bai Zhong invited herself in. I waited outside for so long, all because I was afraid that Sect Leader Yan might wake up. Shen Long, let's make a deal. You didn't want to give Li Yue a shot because he's too ugly. So why not give me that shot? I refuse, said Shen Qiao. Bai Zhong started, at a loss for how to react. This one hasn't even finished yet. How could you refuse her already? Shen Qiao felt around on Li Yue's body and found 2 more torches. He lit one, the fire's glow immediately illuminating half the cave. Bai Zhong shifted ever so slightly, appearing at Yan Wushi's side in an instant. She raised her high palm and aimed it at his head, but she was blocked by Shen Qiao, who'd somehow appeared there as well. They quickly exchanged dozens of blows inside the cramped cave. Hu Huan's sect was famous for their charm techniques and pair cultivation, but their martial arts abilities were no less potent than the likes of Huan Yue's sect and Fa Jing's sect. Although she was young, Bai Zhong's grasp on martial arts was already spectacular. She used San Jingxing's set of footwork techniques, 16 steps from heaven to abyss, coupled with her palm techniques, so that the variations in her moves became endless and unpredictable, almost impossible to defend against. She knew that Shen Qiao wasn't someone she could subdue by herself, so she launched a preemptive attack in a bid to finish things quickly. She executed more than 10 palm strikes in just the blink of an eye. Combined with her ever-changing, unpredictable footwork, it was as if she were striking at Shen Qiao from every direction at once. She even giggled as she attacked. Shenlang, you're so sly. Last time when we fought, you mimicked Yan Wusher's spring water's finger technique and gave me such a scare. Now that I've seen through you, you can't scare me anymore. Shen Qiao didn't speak. His current martial abilities put him just about equal to Bai Zhong, which meant that, under ordinary circumstances, neither of them could do anything to the other, and that perhaps Bai Zhong was even the slightest bit stronger. During their last encounter, Bai Zhong's fear of his finger attack had given him an opening to exploit. But there wouldn't be a second time. Bai Zhong was clever and had learned better. She might have been all smiles and gentle words while speaking to Shen Qiao before, but when it came time to take action, she showed not one shred of mercy. Bai Zhong had observed from outside for a while because she couldn't tell if Yan Wushi had really entered qi deviation. But thanks to the commotion Li Yue had cooked up, she'd been able to confirm her suspicions. And now that she wanted to kill Yan Wushi, Shen Qiao was her biggest obstacle. Shenlang, didn't you feel sorry for my situation in He Huan sect? If I kill Yan Wushi, I'll have eliminated a great enemy for them, and from then on, no one in He Huan sect will dare look down on me. This one doesn't need you to do anything at all. Just stand aside and watch. Simpler than lifting a finger, yet you won't do this one little thing? Bai Zhong's eyes were soulful as she pleaded and wheedled, but her attacks didn't let up for an instant. Shenlang, was Yan Wushi truly kind to you? He might have saved you, but he only sees you as a plaything, a way to indulge his little hobby of messing with people. You have a gentle nature, so you repay every kindness you receive 10 times over. But if he was truly kind to you, why does he leave you in danger time and again? It can't be that you've really fallen for the demon lord, can it? If you let me kill Yan Wushi, I'll do everything I can to help you recover your martial arts and regain your position as Xuandu Mountain sect leader. Isn't having power within your grasp 100 times better than being forced to depend on others? Chapter 42, Repaying Kindness. It struck with the force of a howling squall, flooding the cramped space with true qi. The torch had long ago been extinguished, and moonlight spilled inside the cave to interweave with the blows from their palms like a river of stars splashed across the sky, painting a vivid, elegant scene. Whenever their internal qi surged and collided, it cut like a knife. In short order, Li Yue's face and hands were sliced and bleeding. Only Yan Wushi continued to sit as before, seemingly as impervious as diamond. True qi and shockwaves buffeted him, but they left little mark. Bai Zhong was impatient, fearful of the unwanted turns the fight could take if it dragged on. With the flick of her sleeves, countless grains of fine powder scattered outward, colorless and devoid of smell. They accompanied her palm blasts. A normal martial artist would have had time to avoid the powder, but no matter how sensitive Shen Qiao's ears were, he couldn't detect it right away. Only a moment later, numbness spread over his body, his arms and legs going weak, telling him he'd fallen for Bai Zhong's ploy. Shenlang, oh Shenlang, said Bai Zhong. You almost ruined things for me, but I'll still show you mercy. The drug isn't poisonous. It'll just incapacitate your arms and legs for about half a day. You must remember this favor I showed you. But for now, could you please stop getting in my way? She still sounded mellow and sweet, like she was playing coy with her lover, all while she struck at Shen Qiao with her palm. After all, the drug might not be completely effective, so it was better to beat him until he couldn't fight back. That way, she could take care of Yan Wushi in peace. Her blow struck him, and Shen Qiao slammed into a rough, jagged wall of stone. Pain tore through him, and he felt something warm and wet start to seep through his robes. Shenlang, don't hold my ruthlessness against me, Bai Zhong said gently. You persisted on protecting him, so I had to get rid of you first. Don't worry, though. I've changed my mind. A dead Yan Wushi wouldn't do me any good, but a brainless idiot as Huanrie's sect leader? That would serve He Huan sect's interests far better, so I'll spare his life. She raised her lovely fair palm as she spoke, then struck it down at the crown of Yan Wusher's head. Baizhong was certain she'd used the perfect amount of force. With this hit, she wouldn't damage Yan Wusher's skull in the slightest, but rather only his brain. But before her palm met its target, she was forced to dodge to the side. The bamboo cane darted after her like a shadow. "Didn't you inhale the drug?" Baizhong was incredulous. "I did a little," said Shen Qiao, "but I held my breath in time." Shen Qiao coughed, his movements slightly slowing. Spotting her chance, Baizhong attacked, using her 16 steps from heaven to abyss to appear before Shen Qiao like a phantom. She jabbed her index and middle fingers toward Shen Qiao's heart, slipping right through his defenses. She wanted to force him to retreat, but Shen Qiao didn't withdraw. He even moved forward, forcing Baizhong to stay her hand. "Do you like him that much? Enough to give your life to protect him?" Baizhong yelled, utterly exasperated. Shen Qiao remained silent. It wasn't clear whether he was unwilling to explain or thought speaking would be too much effort. Right at that moment, Yan Wusher's tightly closed eyes sprang open. Shen Qiao's back was to him, so he didn't see it happen. But Baizhong did. Her heart leapt in shock at the sight of Yan Wusher staring straight at her. Unable to determine what sort of state he was in, she said, "Shenlong, your lover's awake. Do you still have the time to fight me?" Sure that she was lying, Shen Qiao naturally ignored her. It wasn't until a cool breeze from behind reached him that he became aware, and he was forced to turn to block. Baizhong took this chance to move, alighting softly near the cave's entrance. "You thought I was lying? Well, you two have fun catching up. I won't interfere." With another giggle, she vanished from the mouth of the cavern. She could handle someone like Shen Qiao, but with someone like Yan Wusher in the mix, especially one who could fight, the only outcome was death. So, once she was certain Yan Wusher was awake, she made the immediate decision to cut and run. A brutal swipe from the front sent the bamboo cane flying. Shen Qiao didn't even have time to speak before his throat was grabbed in a vicious chokehold. "Shen Qiao." The voice was bone-chilling. Not a trace of emotion was in it. The grip around his throat was so crushing, his neck was about to snap in two. Shen Qiao was about to suffocate, but in his alarm, he sent over a palm strike. Yet Yan Wusher didn't evade. He took the blow straight on. His grip slackened, and he backed up several steps, but he didn't hack up any blood. Meanwhile, Shen Qiao bowed over at the waist, coughing so hard that tears streamed down his face. The remaining strength drained from his body, and he slumped to the ground. After a long moment, Yan Wusher spoke again. "Why are you here?" His voice sounded much closer to his normal tone, but Shen Qiao remained wary. He leaned against the stone wall, gasping. "You had a qi deviation." Yan Wusher looked at Li Yue, who still lay inside the cave, then shifted his gaze back to Shen Qiao. Suddenly he smiled. "I'm not wrong, am I?" he said. "Such a good opportunity was presented to you, and you didn't seize it to kill me? Or even hide on the sidelines and watch me get killed. You actually intervened." "Why would I kill you?" asked Shen Qiao. Yan Wusher burst out laughing. "Ah, Qiao, did you spend so much time with me that you actually fell in love?" Shen Qiao went on panting, then slowly said 3 words. "Repaying my debt." "Repaying your debt?" Surprise colored Yan Wusher's smile. "I remember telling you early on that I only saved you on a whim. I wanted to see if you were qualified to be my opponent, and I wanted to enjoy seeing whether a poor soul like you would break down, someone who had nothing, who'd been betrayed and abandoned by his dearest kin. I wanted to see if you'd be unable to endure the shock and lose your mind." "No matter motives, it doesn't change that you saved me. Even if you'd saved me only to kill me later, then I should still be grateful before I'm killed." Yan Wusher burst out laughing even louder. "Ah, Qiao, oh, ah, Qiao. I don't think you should be a Taoist. If only you'd practice Buddhism instead. With your soft heart, you might have already cultivated yourself into the highest of holy monks. Then you wouldn't have been tossed off a cliff and ended up in such tragic state." Shen Qiao ignored his sarcasm. He drew his breath, then continued. With Yuan Yong in power now, Zhou could almost be called peaceful. If you weren't here, and only Bian Yanmei and Yu Shengyan led Huanyue sect, they might be able to fend off ambitions of the various powers surrounding you. And if misfortune were to strike down Yuan Yong, the ministers and officials might be able to carry on serving a new emperor. But if other countries seized upon the opportunity to declare war, then in the end, only the ordinary civilians will suffer. Yan Wushi smiled. Well, your tongue has certainly grown sharper. In the middle of their conversation, Li Yue woke up. At first, he looked stunned and bewildered. But when he saw Yan Wushi eyeing him with interest, his shock immediately transformed into panic. He half stumbled, half crawled to his feet, then dashed out of the entrance without another word. Yan Wushi carelessly flicked a pebble from his hand. The stone shard grazed past Li Yue's ear, leaving a fine trickle of blood. Li Yue shrieked and ran even faster. If Yan Wushi had wanted to kill him, he'd have been a cold corpse by now. Shen Qiao didn't know why Yan Wushi had changed his mind, and he didn't have the strength left to guess. He leaned against the wall, but the dried gash on his back ached more and more. If it wasn't for the true qi circulating through his body, he'd have been frozen solid. Yan Wushi turned to him and said, I won't kill him, because there are a myriad of ways to give someone a fate worse than death. He failed to kill me, so from now on, he's bound to live in eternal fear of my retribution. His life will never grow easier. All I need to do is send people under my name to harass him from time to time, and he'll scare himself half to death for me. Don't you think that's much more entertaining? But another thought occurred to Shen Qiao. Even if I hadn't intervened, Li Yue and Bai Rong couldn't have killed you, right? That's right, said Yan Wushi. I couldn't move, but I could still sense the outside world. I heard your conversations. You discovered the freezing qi inside of me. If they tried to kill me, they'd have been struck with the backlash from the cold qi too. Shen Qiao sighed softly. Bai Rong left, he said suddenly. Until just then, Bai Rong had been lurking outside the cave, trying to confirm whether or not Yan Wushi had really recovered. It wasn't until Li Yue fled and she heard Yan Wushi and Shen Qiao's conversation that she finally gave up and left too. Yan Wushi laughed. Why do you sigh, Qiao? You climbed all this way up the mountain, ignored all dangers to protect me. How could I not do you a favor? You don't like seeing me kill people, so I'll let them go this time. Not an issue. And it'd be such a pity if that little girl Bai Rong died now. With her around, Hehuan's sect has quite a lot of fun to look forward to. He rose, then bent down to lift Shen Qiao, but the moment his hand touched the other man's back, Shen Qiao shuddered, probably because his robe rubbed against his wound. Yan Wushi noticed and pulled Shen Qiao onto his back instead. He'd just had a qi deviation and been in a perilous situation, but now he seemed perfectly fine, treading down the cliff from the cave as if it were flat ground. With a moment's effort, they were already at the foot of the mountain. As they returned to the guest complex, Shen Qiao applied medicine, regulating his breathing for recuperation, and then entered straight into a 3-day seclusion. When he emerged 3 days later, the envoy of Zhou had already completed their mission and were preparing to return home. On hearing that he'd been wounded, Yuan Qing sent many people to the guest complex with tonics. He harbored secret curiosity about the conclusion of Yan Wushi and Ru Yankohui's battle. He'd heard it came to a draw, but he didn't know any details. As he didn't have the courage to ask Yan Wushi in person, he wanted to find Shen Qiao. Unfortunately, Shen Qiao had entered seclusion and was unable to meet him. So Yuan Qing waited for 3 days, anxious, out of his mind, until Shen Qiao finally came out. He then set off in haste to find Shen Qiao. First, he asked after his health, then said awkwardly, I didn't think it would be so crowded that day. I almost got separated from Yutze. I hope you weren't seriously injured. Many thanks to you and Xiong for your concern, said Shen Qiao. It was only a few minor injuries. Most of them have already healed. I'll be honest with you, said Yuan Qing. We are about to head back to Zhou, and if all goes as expected, some from Linchuan Academy will be there to send us off. But who exactly won when Junior Preceptor Yan and Academy Master Ru Yan dueled? You watched the fight from the sidelines, so you must know everything. The Junior Preceptor said nothing, and I'm too afraid to press him for answers, but if he won, then I can taunt the people from Linchuan Academy a little and show off the prestige of our great Zhou. Shen Qiao hadn't expected Yuan Qing to rush over and see him for something so trivial. He thought it somewhat comical. Sect Leader Yan won by a narrow margin, I believe. Ah! Yuan Qing's brows curved in pleasure, but there was also some disbelief. Truly? I've heard that Ru Yan Kuhui is a very powerful martial artist, enough to rank among the top 3 in the world. Perhaps he might even qualify for number 1? Yuan Qing wouldn't be able to understand martial arts even with a thorough explanation, so Shen Qiao picked the simplest answer. In truth, both of them were injured. For Sect Leader Yan, it triggered some old injuries, but in the case of Academy Master Ru Yan, if my guess is correct, his meridians were damaged. He likely won't be able to use his true qi freely for a month. Why only a month? I'd say he won't be able to fight anyone for 3 months. A cool voice came from the door, and Yan Wushi walked in. If you had something to ask, why didn't you come ask me personally? For some reason, the sight of Yan Wushi always rattled Yuan Qing. The moment Yan Wushi's terrifying gaze fell on him, it was as if needles sprouted on his chair, leaving him squirming uncontrollably. The Junior Preceptor has thousands of things to attend to every day, he immediately replied with a nervous laugh. So I dare not disturb you. Didn't want to disturb you at all. I'm about to go supervise them and make sure the packing's getting done. Once we're ready to set out, I'll send someone over to tell you. The moment he finished speaking, he sped right out of the door. Yan Wushi turned to Shen Qiao. How was it? Shen Qiao knew what he was talking about. Your battle with Ru Yan Kuhui was brilliant. It was exceptional. Perhaps others gleaned some new insights, but during my 3-day seclusion, I made no progress beyond healing a few old wounds. It feels as if there's some sort of barrier preventing me from advancing any further. I'm left spinning in place. The only good things are that my circulation of true qi has smoothed out a bit, and my eyes have improved somewhat. I can roughly make out light and shadow now. What a pity, said the voice deep inside Yan Wushi's heart. Cold and unfeeling, callous and heartless. But none of that showed on his face. Instead, he gave Shen Qiao a small smile. That's good. Soon, word of the duel between Yan Wushi and Ru Yan Kuhui spread like wildfire. What everyone most cared about was who had won. In southern Chun, Ru Yan Kuhui wasn't only famous in the Jianghu, he was also a significant figure in the imperial court. The Lord of Chun treated him with utmost respect, and Empress Liu was always also from Linchuan Academy. Hence, in the eyes of many Southerners, Linchuan Academy's status was so special and noteworthy. He may as well have been the head of Confucianism and martial arts in the Southern dynasty. With that kind of status and reputation, even the idea of Ru Yan losing to Yan Wushi was practically unimaginable. However, everyone who'd watched the fight that day said it was a draw. That was fact. And ever since Ru Yan Kuhui had returned, he'd shut himself inside Linchuan Academy and never left. No matter who came around to visit, they couldn't get a meeting with him. Yan Wushi was the same. He stayed in the great complex and never went elsewhere. This only spurred on the rumor mill further. Some said that both had been grievously wounded, some that Ru Yan Kuhui had won by a slight margin, and now Yan Wushi was too ashamed to show his face. At the same time, Yuan Qing sent a message saying that he wished to invite Academy Master Ru Yan to a banquet that Sect Leader Yan was throwing at the guest complex. He said that he hoped the Academy Master could take the time to honor them with his attendance. It was purely his own concoction, a method of embarrassing the Southerners that he'd come up with after hearing Shen Qiao's report on the duel. If the Linchuan Academy Master didn't make an appearance, he could mock them relentlessly. And if Ru Yan Kuhui did attend, that worked too. After all, he'd never said that Yan Wushi would show up at the banquet. Though the two countries had formed an alliance, everyone knew it was only temporary. They all shared the same goal right now, but the moment that goal disappeared, the allies would return to being enemies. Keeping up the pretense on the surface worked well enough. Underneath it all, the fight had never ceased. Quite a few Southerners were upset about the invitation. They all thought that Yuan Qing was going too far. One after another, a good number who thought highly of their own martial prowess came to the guest complex asking to challenge Yan Wushi. But Yan Wushi was the kind of man who reserved even his egotism and conceit for those on his level. The mediocre remainder weren't worth his attention, so he couldn't care less what they said or thought. And if he really were to personally greet them, they wouldn't so much as greet the sun the next day. In fact, Yan Wushi didn't need to do anything at all. The men who'd come with Yuan Qing were enough to deal with the martial artists who occasionally came knocking. 2 days later, news finally arrived from Linchuan Academy. They graciously declined Yuan Qing's invitation, saying that the academy master was in seclusion and unable to meet with anyone. This reply seemed to confirm Yuan Qing's insinuations, and those voices chastising the Zhou envoys for being too arrogant vanished overnight. Of course, Yuan Qing was completely gleeful, and he happily went to inform Shen Qiao, only to hear the news from Ruru that Shen Qiao had already left. As Ruru was completely in the dark, Yuan Qing was forced to look for Yan Wushi, even though he was terrified of speaking to him. Junior Preceptor, he said, does your esteemed self know where Taoist Master Shen has gone? What, do you yearn for him that much? Asked Yan Wushi in return. Yuan Qing tentatively gave him an apologetic smile. Nothing of the sort. Taoist Master Shen traveled here with us, so he should be returning with us as well. But now he's disappeared, so I ought to ask about it. He left, said Yan Wushi. Eh? Originally, Yan Wushi had no interest in telling him too much, but Yuan Qing's disappointed and bewildered expression amused him. He told me a while ago that he would leave on his own after he'd seen my venerable self's duel with Ruyan Kehui. But where can he go by himself? Yuan Qing muttered. Didn't he say he couldn't return to Xuandu Mountain? Yan Wushi laughed. Yuan Qing, you brought your beloved concubine along for the trip, but now you're wavering? You're so worried about Shen Qiao. Is this venerable one nothing to you? Though he was smiling as he spoke, a shudder ran through Yuan Qing. Losing the nerve to ask any further questions, he excused himself and beat a hasty retreat. Watching the pathetic figure Yuan Qing cut as he ran away, Yan Wushi languidly put down the book in his hand and looked out the window. A smile still hung on the corner of his lips, but in his eyes was a bone-chilling amusement. Just then, Shen Qiao was on the road, walking north. There was precisely the right amount of sun. Dressed in blue, carrying his bamboo staff, the ends of his robes fluttering, he couldn't hold back a smile that curled the corners of his lips. Squinting and with a hand against his forehead to block out the sunlight, he could see the scene before him. Though he couldn't see as clearly as before his injuries, what vision he did have now, he appreciated more than ever. Before leaving, he'd gone to find Yuan Qing and say his farewells, but the other man hadn't been there. So he penned a letter to Yuan Qing and asked Ruru to pass it to him on his behalf. But Ruru was very much afraid of her master, so it was possible that she'd given the letter to Yan Wushi first. Still, there wasn't much in the letter beyond the standard courtesies. Shen Qiao had thought Yan Wushi would refuse to let him go, but things had gone surprisingly smoothly. Yan Wushi said little and agreed straight away, leaving Shen Qiao somewhat taken aback. This Huanye sect leader's character was just as the rumors painted him, mercurial and unpredictable. Even after they spent so much time together, Shen Qiao still dared not say that he completely understood him. Perhaps it was because he'd refused to accept the demonic core, coupled with how hopeless the project of recovering his martial arts seemed. Yan Wushi no longer considered him a worthy rival, and in his disappointment, had been delighted to let him go. Or perhaps it was because he'd arduously climbed mountains to fend off Li Yue and Bai Zhong's attacks, and that act had finally moved Yan Wushi. Right. Wouldn't that prove that no matter how callous and unfeeling a person was, a trace of humanity still lay deep within their hearts? Shen Qiao shook his head and laughed helplessly at his own conjectures. Perhaps he did think too well of others, but if it made him happier, what was wrong with believing the best of people? His journey out of Jiankang progressed smoothly. The region south of the Yangtze had always been prosperous since ancient times. It was bordered by land and water and was politically stable as well. There, it was easy to forget that the world was still in turmoil. However, as he crossed over the border of Chen and entered Qi, still heading north, the number of travelers and merchants dropped noticeably, and the expressions on their faces held less contentment, less joy. Instead, there was a nervousness and fatigue about them. Shen Qiao found that he greatly enjoyed observing the emotions on all their faces, perhaps because he'd spent so long judging a person's state by their voice. Even if he couldn't see clearly, there were still quite a few discoveries to be made. April became May as he traveled, walking and resting at intervals. His pace wasn't slow, for when the mood came, he'd also apply some qigong. Almost no one knew that this traveling scholar wandering along carefree and relaxed, supported by a cane, was actually the downtrodden former sect leader of Xuandu Mountain who'd been beholden to the demon lord. By now, the news of Yan Wushi and Ru Yankehui's battle had spread throughout the populace. It seemed there was a grand martial arts conference happening in Liang province, for Shen Qiao saw many people from the Jianghu rushing that way and heard them all talking about the duel. Naturally, the people of Qi didn't revere Ru Yankehui the way the Southerners did. Instead, their words were full of praise for Yan Wushi. It was human nature to admire those of great strength, and Yan Wushi's strength won him many admirers, even some who weren't from the demonic discipline. Shen Qiao was in a tea house outside Liang province's capital at the moment, listening to other patrons discuss how brilliant the fight between Yan Wushi and Ru Yankehui had been. They hadn't witnessed it personally, but their accounts were so exaggerated and flowery one would think they'd seen it themselves. Shen Qiao couldn't help but smile. There was an empty seat beside him, and soon someone sat down in it. Shen Qiao had his head lowered as he sipped his tea, and before he could look up, he heard the newcomer say, "What a coincidence!" Shen Qiao found himself at a loss for words. Chapter 43. Shen Qiao Weeps. Shen Qiao rested his forehead in his palm. This humble Shen thinks that you can no longer call this a coincidence. Yan Wushi languidly turned over the cup on the table and filled it halfway with water. He didn't drink, just left it there. It's such a small world. We part at the ends of the sky, only to meet at the edges of the sea. This venerable one thinks we're quite linked by fate. Why has Sect Leader Yan come here? Well, why have you come here? Asked Yan Wushi. I'm heading to the capital of Qi, Yecheng. Oh, truly a coincidence. I'm heading to Yecheng as well. Shen Qiao was caught between laughing and crying. I'm going to look for someone. Surely you're not looking for somewhere there as well? What a strange thing to say, said Yan Wushi. Why am I not allowed to look for someone? Shen Qiao ignored him and silently finished his tea and snacks. After paying his bill, he picked up his cane, ready to continue on his way. Yan Wushi stood as well, with his hands clasped behind his back. He followed after Shen Qiao, not fast, but not slow. He maintained distance of about 7 to 8 paces between them, never closer, never farther. Shen Qiao took the bizarre situation in stride. He entered Liang province, found an inn, and set down his feather-light travel bags. Then he ordered some food and went to sit on the second floor, where he slowly ate. It was a little past noon. Most guests had already finished their meals and left. So while the second floor was otherwise empty, the floor below was quite lively. The noon market had just opened, and a number of people rushed toward the area carrying their wares. Shen Qiao ordered a jug of plum juice. He'd only taken half a sip when Yan Wushi emerged, climbing the stairs in the corner. He smiled at Shen Qiao. Your expression doesn't have the joy of someone who's seen their old comrade from a distant land. Shen Qiao said helplessly, I'd be happier if Sect Leader Yan hadn't come just to see me. Indeed, I didn't come just to see you, said Yan Wushi. He sat down next to him and Shen Qiao called the waiter over. Soon a second jug of plum juice arrived, together with a bowl and chopsticks. Yan Wushi laughed. Why is Ah Qiao in such a hurry to draw a line between us? Shen Qiao didn't take him seriously. I recall that you value cleanliness. You would never share a jug with someone. Yan Wushi didn't reply. Why does Sect Leader Yan come here, if not to find me? Asked Shen Qiao. Yuan Yong has already drawn up a large-scale plan to conquer Qi. All of Qi is in terror over the news. Even He Huan's sect has begun to splinter from within. He didn't use the fresh jug the waiter had brought. Instead, he picked up Shen Qiao's jug and poured some into his bowl, then brought it to his mouth and took a sip. Yuan Xiushu wants to collaborate with Huanyue's sect, but Sang Jingxing refuses. The two of them fell out, and now Yuan Xiushu has sent me a message saying that Sang Jingxing is currently in Yecheng. She'd like me to help her kill him. Although Sang Jingxing had been the only disciple of Ruyue's sect's final leader, Cui Youwang, he hadn't pursued the reunification of the demonic sects when Ruyue's sect splintered. Instead, he pursued an ardent relationship with Yuan Xiushu. In this way, he became an extraordinarily high-ranked elder in He Huan's sect. But if anyone were to look down on him for this choice, thinking that it meant he was incompetent, they'd be gravely mistaken. The man reveled in murder, was a fanatic when it came to beauties and sex, and had countless enemies. But he also possessed overwhelming martial prowess that was in a class of its own. His ranking among the world's top 10 was especially difficult to locate. Some claimed he ranked in the top 3, while others disagreed. Word had it that he'd absorbed the entirety of Cui Youwang's martial arts before his master's death. Some went even further, claiming that Sang Jingxing was a monster who'd betrayed all decency, killing his own master to steal his martial arts. Though no one had witnessed the crime, Sang Jingxing's reputation was such that many people were happy to add it to the tally of his misdeeds. Shen Qiao sighed. Sang Jingxing must have worked hard to help Yuan Xiushu establish the Huan sect. Even if they've fallen out and become enemies now, there's no need to go so far as killing each other. Yan Wushi sneered. Even Xuandu Mountain has martial siblings turning against each other. When it happens in demonic sects, where the strong prey on the weak reigns supreme, such incidents will only become overt. Now, Sang Jingxing has created his own faction inside He Huan's sect, and the disciples in it only pay lip service to Yuan Xiushu while silently undermining her authority. Just because she doesn't express her hatred doesn't mean she feels none. Otherwise, why has she yet to seek revenge on you for killing Huo Xijing right in front of her? He was Sang Jingxing's disciple. It's highly likely that Yuan Xiushu wants to have you kill Sang Jingxing for her. Even if that's the case, wouldn't it be good news for my venerable self if Sang Jingxing were to die? A He Huan sect without him, with only Yuan Xiushu, could never contend with Huanyue's sect. And once Zhou annexes Qi, their ability to stir up trouble will be greatly limited as well. Shen Qiao shook his head and raised his bowl. Then I can only hope that Sect Leader Yan achieves his goals. Many thanks. Their bowls clinked, the resulting sound crisp and pleasant. Shen Qiao thought back to when they'd first met. He'd never have imagined that there'd come a time where he and Yan Wushi could chat peacefully like this, and he smiled despite himself. Yan Wushi saw the smile on Shen Qiao's lips but averted his eyes and picked up a piece of asparagus with his chopsticks. Did you find the person you were looking for? Not yet, said Shen Qiao. I've heard that they're on the road, but I haven't been able to catch up with him. You're looking for Yu Ai's group, aren't you? Shen Qiao didn't hide it. Yes, Now that I've recovered some of my martial arts, enough to defend myself, I have no need to fear what Yu Ai's planning. Even if we can't come to an agreement, I'll still be able to walk away. I've heard that he brought 2 elders and Gu Shimei with him on his travels, and they're heading to the eastern Khaganate. I wish to speak with Gu Shimei first. Since Yu Ai's left Shendu Mountain, they're without a leader right now, said Yan Wushi. Why not return there first and take back the sect leader's seat? Do that, and he'll be powerless when he returns. Shen Qiao shook his head. Yu Ai is very careful. He left no vulnerabilities, not even with the poisoning incident. If he was confident enough to leave Shendu Mountain for Khaganate, he must have planned everything out ahead of time and would have no qualms about my possible return. After all, he couldn't have done everything himself. Putting aside the majority who have been kept in the dark about his plans, there must have been people within Shendu Mountain secretly supporting him from the very beginning. If I return now, I'll most likely be walking into a trap. On the contrary, the people he has with him now might be the ones who intended to subvert him. Gu Shimei grew up under my watch. I still have some confidence in her. Yan Wushi listened seriously, then nodded and said with a smile, Then this venerable one hopes that your wishes come true as well. Most days, even when his tone was soft and gentle, it would still hold a hint of mockery. It was rare to see him speak so placidly and normally, so Shen Qiao smiled too. Many thanks. There was still quite some distance to Yecheng from Liang Province. The 2 of them stayed 1 more day in Liang Province, then set off northward. Once they were out of Liang Province, the closer they got to Yecheng, the more refugees they saw. Shen Qiao had already been to Yecheng, but the scene before him now was even bleaker than last time. He had to halt and look ahead, watching the vagrants as they slowly trudged along the dry riverbed in the direction of the capital, their motions listless and eyes dull. He could remember encountering this kind of scene countless times before. It seemed like a world completely apart from the Jianghu. In truth, most people who could carve out space for themselves in the Jianghu were from families with money to spare. Some of them were even wealthy landlords, or their families ran large enterprises, such as the Liuhe Guild, who did business both by land and sea, and whose dealings spanned all nations. They were a true example of a powerful organization, and of course, Huanyue's sect was even more impressive. They held deep ties to the Zhou imperial court, so they had many estates, not only in the capital, but all over Zhou. Even Xuandu's Violet Palace, who insisted on withdrawing from mundane affairs, had in truth purchased all of Xuandu Mountain during its first generation, after its founder had established the sect. The fields at the foot of the mountain, cultivated by residents of Xuandu Town, were all rented from Xuandu Mountain. The successive generations of sect leaders all had kind hearts and set fair rental fees, but the combined income, taken together with what Xuandu Mountain produced itself, was plenty enough to support Xuandu Mountain's disciples. Only people who lived comfortable and worry-free lives could concentrate on practicing martial arts and pursuing such aspirations. How could someone who couldn't even feed themselves, who had to worry about their next meal, be in the frame of mind to train? As for the refugees before him now, from the time they were born, their children were forced to face both natural and man-made calamities, and were left hungry every day. Crueler still, the children might even be used as reserve rations by their parents. Even if 1 or 2 of them had the outstanding potential to be martial geniuses, it was very likely that they'd perish before discerning eyes discovered their talents. Qiao, soft heart is acting up again. Surprisingly, Yan Wushi didn't mock him this time. There was a smile in his tone, but also a sigh. Shen Qiao shook his head. In truth, I was also an orphan. I don't know who my parents are, but I was left abandoned in the desolate wilderness. It's said that I was very weak after birth and almost died in my swaddling clothes. Perhaps that's why my parents abandoned me. Or maybe they were too poor to raise me. In any case, I was fortunate to meet Shitsun, who saved my life. So every time I see these people, I always regret how little I can do for them. If I'd realized this earlier while I was on Shendu Mountain, I could have directed the sect to re-enter the secular world. Then maybe I could have taken in some poor children as disciples and saved a few more lives. Life is never fair, said Yan Wushi. Some are the prides of heaven from birth, surrounded by riches and luxuries, while others are born without even kin to rely on and have to struggle in poverty. People like you, who can judge every person by themselves, are the rarest of rare. Most are like Changong, filled with bottomless greed, constantly overestimating themselves and believing they can always get more. If Xuandu Mountain took in a couple more disciples, it's highly possible you'd end up with a couple more ingrates like Ui. Shen Qiao smiled helplessly. But it's also possible that we'd end up with a couple more people of great promise, the kind who can aid those in crisis, who could rectify the course of the world. Yan Wushi disagreed. If you want something, you must fight for it yourself instead of dreaming that someone will come and help you. A person's life and death are a result of their own choices and have nothing to do with others. Shen Qiao spoke no more. Not far in the distance, a couple walked toward them, dragging a small boy who was little more than a bag of bones. As he walked, they quarreled. Shen Qiao and Yan Wushi's excellent ears naturally heard part of the argument. They'd exchanged their own child for this one and were currently looking for a place to cook him, somewhere with nobody else around. That was to prevent anyone from seeing and trying to steal him from them. But they themselves had already begun fighting over how to divide the portions. The husband thought that only the legs and back of the child still had meat and wanted all of it for himself. But the wife argued that she had delivered the child they'd traded away after 10 months of suffering, and so she should get first choice of the food they'd received. They looked like they lacked the strength to walk, yet they suddenly started to scuffle. The child they'd traded for simply watched from the side blankly, letting them fight over the right to eat him first. His expression was numb, as if his consciousness had left him long ago. Shen Qiao couldn't take it anymore. He went up and seized the boy. Seeing that their meal had been stolen, the couple immediately stopped scuffling with each other and lunged at Shen Qiao. They hadn't eaten for many days. A moderately strong woman could have knocked him down easily, let alone Shen Qiao. But even after Shen Qiao brought the boy back with him, the child's expression didn't change in the slightest. Forget gratitude. He didn't even show the slightest joy at escaping with his life. "What's your name?" asked Shen Qiao. "Would you like something to eat?" Shen Qiao reached out to pull him closer. But before he could touch him, the boy simply tipped forward and fell to the ground, motionless. Shen Qiao was alarmed. He went up for a closer look and realized that the boy had been gravely ill for some time. The disease had long spread to his organs. He'd already been at death's door when the couple had been dragging him along. Even the gods couldn't have saved him. And at that moment, unable to hold out any longer, his heart finally gave out. Whether Shen Qiao tried to save him or not made no difference at all. His eyes still remained half open, as if within him lingered a final truce of reluctance and a denouncement of the world. Judging from the scars on his body and the ribs straining beneath his skin, this boy had probably never lived a single good day in his life. He probably never understood why he had to be born and suffer through such misery. Shen Qiao was still for a long time, watching him without blinking. Suddenly, he reached out and passed his hand over the boy's face, closing those half-open eyes. And yet, another hand came and covered Shen Qiao's eyes, gently swabbing the wet tracks from their corners. "You didn't even cry when I betrayed you, but now you're crying over someone you didn't even know?" "Everything I encountered before, whether they were setbacks or hardships, were things I could endure. But this little boy, he probably never hurt anyone. Heaven ordained his birth, and it shouldn't have been to suffer. Everyone has the right to live. No matter how difficult his life was, it should have at least shown him some hope of a way out." Yan Wushi would have thought such words hypocritical from anyone else's mouth. Even now, he could never do the things Shen Qiao did. But somehow, Unconsciously and naturally, the disdain that had welled up inside him in the beginning had changed. Now, when Shen Qiao did these things, he was no longer surprised, nor did he find it strange. "You're too naive," he said. "Who's responsible for giving him that kind of hope? Other people also need to live, and they also need to worry about themselves. Why should they be kind to him?" Shen Qiao stood up. "I was willing to be kind to him, but I was a moment too late." "You can only save 1 or 2 people by yourself at most," Yan Wushi said indifferently. "So many people in the world are in the same state as him, yet you're indifferent to them. Isn't that hypocritical?" If one day, when the turmoil ends and the land is unified, and this kind of thing still happens, then at least it will happen far less. And then more than just 1 or 2 will be saved. It will be thousands and thousands. Isn't that right? Yan Wushi didn't care enough to reply, but instead walked to the side of the road. Using his palm as a blade, he used his internal energy to slice open a deep ditch beneath a tree. It was a perfect rectangle and of uniform depth. Seeing what he'd done, Shen Qiao understood the meaning and smiled despite himself. "Many thanks." He placed the little boy's corpse into the ditch, laying him flat. Then he swept dirt inside, filling it until it was level and smooth. In these troubled times, it was fortunate if a corpse wasn't left exposed in the wilderness. If he erected a tomb marker, people might think they were funerary objects buried beneath them, and it would draw the attention of robbers. With everything settled, Shen Qiao and Yan Wushi entered the city. Inside the city and outside were practically 2 different worlds. It was said that when Gao Wei, the emperor of Qi, heard about the years of famine and the widespread refugees, he didn't order his subordinates to provide disaster relief. Instead, he built a pauper's village at Hualing Garden inside the capital. There, he dressed up as a beggar and told the eunuchs and maidservants to play traveling merchants and passers-by so that he could experience the fun of begging for himself. Hence, when people in Yecheng talked about Hualing Garden, their faces showed no admiration for the royal garden, but rather a subtle, tacit mockery. However, even as danger loomed from the northern Zhou army pressing ever closer to their border, the city still looked like its peaceful, carefree self, not much different from the last few times Shen Qiao had visited. It was still the same luxurious, perfumed carriages, the same extravagant atmosphere, the long and fluttering sleeves, the brocade sashes and silk skirts, the jade hairpins and magnificent robes, the subtle fragrances as they wafted. It was an explosion of splendor as far as the eye could see. This was the face of Yecheng, the capital of Qi, a world full of glory and wealth. At first glance, newly arrived travelers wouldn't find a single poor person. They might even grow ashamed at their own lack of wealth, thinking themselves too shabby in comparison. However, if one took a quick glance into the many alleys and nooks, they could sometimes spot a few plainly dressed ordinary citizens, starkly incongruent with the flood of luxury surrounding them. Finding a couple of people in such a large city was not something that could be accomplished in 1 or 2 days. Yu Ai and his group might have taken up lodgings at a Taoist monastery, or perhaps they changed into ordinary robes to hide their identities. If the latter were true, it'd be like hunting for a needle at the bottom of the sea, compounding the difficulty. The 2 of them parted just after entering the city. Yan Wushi didn't say where he was going, and Shen Qiao didn't ask. He only said, "Take care, Sect Leader Yan. I hope everything goes well." "Looking for an inn to stay at?" asked Yan Wushi. Shen Qiao thought for a moment. "I'll try searching the Taoist monasteries first. If I can't find them, I'll just stay in one of the monasteries." Yan Wushi nodded. This venerable one still has business to attend to. He didn't elaborate, just turned to leave. In the blink of an eye, he'd completely vanished from Shen Qiao's sight. Shen Qiao stood in place for a while, watching as Yan Wushi disappeared into the crowd. He smiled despite himself, then also took his leave. He hadn't walked far when a large troop of men on horseback marched toward him. Soldiers led the way as they drove the pedestrians aside, and everyone quickly scattered off the road. No one wanted to bump into the nobles behind those soldiers, lest they bring trouble upon themselves. Shen Qiao had dodged to the side too when he heard someone behind him say curiously, "Which prince or princess is it this time?" Another person laughed and replied, "You're wrong. Look at the insignia. It's the Prince of Chunyang Commandery." "Ah," understanding dawned on the first man. "The Prince of Chunyang Commandery, who's greatly favored by the emperor?" "Correct," said the second in a meaningful tone. "That's him." The Prince of Chunyang Commandery, Mu Tipuo, was greatly renowned. Almost everyone had heard of him. However, his fame came from the emperor, not from his own achievements or abilities. There was also some deeply unpleasant history between Shen Qiao and this Prince of Chunyang Commandery. Because of him, Mu Tipuo would never be able to have relations ever again. His loathing for Shen Qiao was probably long-standing and bone-deep. Shen Qiao wasn't afraid of him, but he was here to find someone, not cause more trouble. After hearing who it was, he backed deeper into the crowd, preparing to hide himself in a nearby shop for the first time. But then he heard someone's surprised voice. "That's not Prince of Chunyang Commandery." Shen Qiao looked back. In an unfortunate coincidence, the person riding high astride the horse was just then looking in his direction. Their gazes met. Shen Qiao calmly turned his head away, unruffled, but the other party started slightly. "Oh, it's not the Prince of Chunyang Commandery. He's the new favorite of the emperor. I heard that he was recommended by the Prince of Chunyang Commandery. His Majesty is very fond of him right now. Even Consort Feng has to take a backseat to him." "Consort Feng? She's the one who... right?" "Right. The emperor stripped her naked, then let the officials pay to look at her. 1,000 gold per look. That Consort Feng." The surrounding crowd followed up with a stint of knowing laughter. With an emperor and officials like that, what hope was there for the country? Shen Qiao thought of Yuan Yong, who he'd met, then shook his head. He quickly dove back into the crowd and left. Northern Qi esteemed Buddhism. Therefore, as Yecheng was also a Buddhist city, there were practically no Taoist monasteries. Shen Qiao asked several passers-by, but none of them knew of any in the city. It wasn't until he asked an old man that he received an answer. "There's Bailong Monastery in the west of the city, but there's only one abbot and 2 young priests. Normally, it's fairly lonely. Few people go there." Shen Qiao thanked the old man, and after some searching, he quickly found Bailong Monastery. From the outside, only the words Bailong Monastery on a wooden plaque were still crisp and legible. The rest of the building was scarred over with moss, and the roof tiles were decayed. It'd probably been many years since the place had been last cleaned and repaired. The old man had said 2 young priests, but the gates were unlatched. As Shen Qiao walked all the way into the courtyard, he saw nary a shadow. He raised his voice and called out a few times. Finally, a boy priest came out yawning. "Why has this gentleman come?" Shen Qiao bowed and cupped his hands. "May I ask this young Taoist priest if a group of people have come to stay in the past few days? Their leader is a young man, and following him should be a young woman and 2 old men, perhaps a number of disciples as well. The young man has a red mole beneath his ear, and they may or may not be wearing Taoist robes." The boy priest shook his head. "No, our monastery has always been cold and lonely, day and night. It's been a long time since anyone's come here." Shen Qiao was a little disappointed. Seeing that the sky was growing dark, he asked, "Then, are there any empty guest rooms available? This one wishes to stay the night." "There are," said the boy priest, "but they haven't been cleaned in a while. You'll have to clean them yourself." "Many thanks," said Shen Qiao. "As long as there's somewhere I can stay, may I ask if the abbot is here, young priest? As I'm borrowing a room from the host, I must at least thank him." "No need. said the boy. My master doesn't meet with outsiders, and in the end, you're only borrowing a room, not money. Whether or not you see him doesn't matter. He led Shen Qiao through the monastery's main hall, bringing him to one of the rooms in the back courtyard. When he pushed open the doors, they were greeted with a face full of musty air, age-old and thick with dust. The boy himself began coughing incessantly, his hand fanning hard before his nose. Look, it's so dirty. You really want to sleep here? He asked as Shen Qiao askance. Shen Qiao gave it a brief scan. The bed was a little dirty, but there was a broom and dust cloth, along with a well right outside. It would be good enough with a quick cleaning. His lodgings hadn't been that luxurious or comfortable back when he'd been honored as the sect leader of Xuandu Mountain either. I'll be fine. Thank you, young priest. Since he'd said so, the boy let him be. We don't eat after noontime, so the stove isn't burning. If you want to eat, you'll have to cook something yourself. The kitchen has kettles and cups, but no rice or flour. If you want to buy something to eat, there's a market right across the street outside. You should go quickly, though, since they'll be closing soon. With this kind of hospitality, no wonder the monastery drew few pilgrims to stay, even though they were located in the capital. Beyond the residents simply esteeming Buddhism, it seemed that the host's attitude itself was a problem. But Shen Qiao didn't complain. He only smiled, giving a positive reply to everything the boy said. Once the child had left, he began cleaning, spraying water, sweeping, and scrubbing the cot. Not much later, the boy returned, excitement shining on his face. Sir, quickly, come and look. There are so many carriages outside, all carrying so many things. They said it's all for you. All right, everyone. So that concludes the reading of chapters 41 through 43. So there are a couple of things that I like about these chapters that we just experienced, but mostly I'm going to talk about chapter 43 really quickly. I love that we finally got to see a bit of a softer-ish side of Yan Wushi with Shen Qiao. Typically speaking, that's not any kind of attitude he gives anyone. So it's nice to see him not being so mocking and like genuinely holding conversation with him. And even what he did when they, the little boy died and they buried him, he made the grave for him. That was so sweet, whether he meant to be that way or not. But speaking about that boy, I have to say, it was mentioned earlier in volume 1, but this whole starvation thing that's going on in the country and the way that people are going about their starvation is horrible to me. Like exchanging your child for someone else's so that they can eat your child so you're not, and then you're eating their child so they're not eating their own, and like trying to rid yourself of a guilty conscience while you eat someone else's kid. My God. Look, I know what it's like to be hungry, okay? I willingly did it to myself, but I fasted once for 25 days. I had nothing but water, and it was awful. And these people, it said they starved for just a few days, and they were willing to give up their child. Now, don't get me wrong. I know that their situation had probably been going on for quite some time. And then, they'd starve, get some food, starve, get some food. And then finally, this time around, they were like, we got to give up the kid because we don't know what else to give up. But I just can't see myself doing that. It's so disgusting. And I mean literally, not like morally speaking, even though I think that too. But I just can't imagine myself eating someone's child. I'm sure it would probably taste good if I did not know. But me taking someone's child, knowing that I'm about to kill them unless they kill over themselves, and then chop them up, put them on a fire and stuff like that. I just can't imagine myself doing that. So anyway, aside from that, I am glad that that little thing happened. Not really, but because Yan Wushi, I think, is finally beginning to understand Shen Qiao's heart and his character. Even if he disagrees with a lot of the things that Shen Qiao believes, he's finally understanding that, okay, no, this is really who Shen Qiao is. He's a kind-hearted, loving, compassionate, empathetic, sympathetic person. So it's nice that he's finally realizing that, oh yeah, this is just who this man is. But anyway, that was chapters 41 through 43. In the next reading, we will be doing another 3 chapters, 44 through 46. So I will see you all next time. And we'll be starting with, of course, Chunggong returns the sandwiches. And oh my God, I'm not ready for that chapter because I remember what happened. But let's go.